a completed autopsy that nobody's allowed to read, a lawsuit that hasn't been filed yet, but the warning letters already have, a reward that's grown by another $100,000 in 7 days, and, in the middle of all of it, a former FBI agent looking at the same case everyone else is arguing about and saying, plainly, that she thinks it was an accident. This isn't the case you saw a week ago. The evidence hasn't changed. Nobody's released anything new about the body itself. But everything around this case has shifted. There's real legal exposure now for people who aren't the family. There are threats serious enough that a friend of Nolan's has hired her own lawyer. And for the first time since this story went national, someone with real investigative credentials has looked at the public record and landed somewhere other than suspicion. We're not going to re-walk you through the audio, the discoloration, or the missing tissue today. You've heard that from us already. This is everything that's happened since. 7 days. A lot changed. Welcome back to the Black Docket. If you're new here, subscribe and drop where you're watching from in the comments. Let's get into it. Start with where the state of Mississippi actually stands, because this is the piece of news that's technically the biggest, even though functionally almost nothing about it has changed. Officials confirmed this week that the state medical examiner has finished the official autopsy report on Nolan Wells. That report has existed, in a drawer, for who knows how long before this confirmation, but as of this week, it's done, complete, ready to be read by someone. That someone is not the public. Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath reiterated, again, in a video statement this week, that the report stays sealed until it's presented to a grand jury. Her language hasn't shifted from what she said the first time she made this call at the end of July. This isn't about delay for delay's sake. It's about following the rules that govern what a prosecutor can release during an active investigation, and protecting the integrity of a case that may eventually go in front of a jury for real. You can be frustrated by that and still recognize it's a legally defensible position. Grand jury secrecy exists specifically so that evidence doesn't get tried in public opinion before it's tried anywhere that actually matters. The frustrating part isn't that the rule exists. It's that nobody outside a small circle of officials knows how long until it's presented to a grand jury actually means in practice. Here's something that hasn't gotten nearly as much attention as it deserves. Multiple people this week received formal letters warning them that a civil lawsuit is coming, tied to Nolan Wells' death. These aren't court filings. Nothing has been officially filed as of this recording. What's circulated are notice letters, a standard legal step attorneys take before filing, essentially putting people on formal notice that litigation may be coming and that they should preserve any relevant evidence, communications, or records in their possession. Several news organizations have obtained and published copies. What this tells you, functionally, is that the family's legal team believes they have a viable civil case against specific people or entities, separate entirely from whatever the criminal investigation does or doesn't produce. A civil case operates on a different, lower evidentiary standard than a criminal one. You don't need proof beyond a reasonable doubt to win a wrongful death lawsuit. You need a preponderance of the evidence, meaning more likely than not. That's a meaningfully lower bar, and it's part of why families in cases like this often pursue both tracks at once. Criminal charges are entirely in the hands of a prosecutor and a grand jury, but a civil suit is something the family's own attorneys can control and push forward on their own timeline. We don't know yet who the letters named or what specific legal theory the eventual complaint will argue. When an actual complaint is filed, that becomes a public document, and we'll go through it. Until then, this is a signal of what's coming, not a description of what's already here. Money has become one of the clearest measures of how much national attention this case is drawing, and this week it climbed again. Actor Tyler Perry and civil rights figure Reverend Al Sharpton each pledged $50,000 for information leading to an arrest, an announcement Sharpton made standing next to Nolan's parents at his funeral service in Ocean Springs. That's on top of reward money already offered by other public figures earlier in the case. A prominent doctor has also added additional funds to the pool this week, according to reporting out of the Gulf Coast. It's worth being straightforward about what a reward like this actually does and doesn't accomplish. It doesn't change the evidence. It doesn't speed up a state autopsy review or a grand jury calendar. What it does is put pressure, financial incentive for anyone who saw something on Horn Island that day, or who knows something about what happened after, to come forward. Whether that pressure produces anything remains to be seen. But the fact that the number keeps growing, week after week, tells you this case isn't losing national attention. If anything, the opposite. This is the part of the story that gets the least airtime, and it might be the most important thing that happened this week. A friend of Nolan's has retained her own attorney after receiving death threats. Not vague online hostility, threats serious enough that she felt the need for legal protection. Separately, reporting this week indicates a New Orleans-based rapper and an adult content creator may have been served a cease and desist, apparently tied to content or claims they'd put out publicly about the case. Step back from the specifics for a second, because the pattern here matters more than any one name. A national true crime story, especially one moving at the speed this one has, doesn't stay contained to the people who were actually there. It pulls in commentators, content creators, amateur investigators, people looking for views, and some of them attach themselves to real people's names with real consequences attached. Teenager who was on that boat, who may have done nothing wrong at all, is now dealing with threats serious enough to need a lawyer. That's not a side effect of true crime coverage. That's a direct cost of it, and it's one we take seriously every time we sit down to cover a case like this. We're not naming anyone here who hasn't already been named publicly by major outlets, and we're not going to speculate about people's culpability based on rumor, because that's exactly the kind of pile-on that's already hurt people who may have nothing to do with what happened to Nolan. Speaking of viral content getting misread, there's a clarification worth covering that came out recently and hasn't gotten much pickup. A video had been circulating online, one that investigators were reportedly reviewing, that some viewers interpreted as showing Nolan in some kind of confrontation. It fueled a wave of speculation. Then Nolan's friend, Tristan Shepard, addressed it directly in a national television interview, saying plainly that the yelling voice people were hearing in that clip wasn't part of any altercation involving Nolan at all. It was her own voice, in an entirely different context than viewers assumed. This matters for a reason bigger than just this one video. It's a live example of exactly what we keep flagging in this coverage. A piece of raw content, stripped of context, took on a life of its own online, before anyone who was actually present had the chance to explain it. Once Shepard spoke on the record, the theory around that specific video lost its foundation. That doesn't mean every theory floating around this case is equally unfounded, but it's a reminder that not everything that looks alarming at first glance turns out to be what it appeared. Now here's the development that might be the most significant shift in tone this case has had in weeks. A former FBI agent, reviewing the publicly available evidence in this case, said this week that in her assessment, what's been made public points toward an accident, not something more sinister. This is worth sitting with, because up to this point, most of the outside experts weighing in publicly on this case, including several we've featured in our own coverage, have leaned toward emphasizing the unanswered questions, the gaps in the evidence, and the reasons foul play can't be ruled out. This is a specific, credentialed voice saying the opposite, that when you look at everything that's actually been confirmed, rather than everything that's been theorized, an accidental death is the more likely explanation. She's not the investigating agency. She doesn't have access to the sealed state autopsy any more than we do. Her opinion is exactly that, an opinion built on the same public information available to anyone following this case closely. But it matters for the same reason we've tried to be careful throughout this coverage. It's easy, in a case this emotionally charged, for every new piece of coverage to lean further and further toward assuming the worst. A credentialed former federal investigator publicly staking out the opposite position is a useful check on that pull. It doesn't resolve anything. It's one more data point in a case that, as of this week, still has more open questions than closed ones. One more update worth including, because it puts everything else in this video in context. Investigators have now interviewed approximately 60 witnesses as they work to reconstruct Nolan's final hours on Horn Island. The Jackson County Sheriff's Department has been working alongside the FBI throughout this process. 60 witnesses is not a small investigation. That's the kind of number you see in cases where investigators are genuinely trying to build a complete, defensible timeline, not just closing a file quickly. Whatever conclusion this investigation eventually reaches, the scale of the interview process this week suggests it's being taken seriously at the institutional level, whatever the public-facing pace has looked like. Here's where things stand. 7 days later than the last time we covered this case in depth. The state's autopsy is finished but sealed. A civil lawsuit appears to be coming, even if it hasn't been filed yet. The reward pool keeps growing. Real people connected to this case, including at least one of Nolan's own friends, are now dealing with threats serious enough to require legal protection. A viral video that fueled one theory has been directly addressed and, according to the person actually in it, debunked. And for the first time, a credentialed outside voice has said publicly that the evidence, as she reads it, points toward an accident rather than something worse. None of that settles this case. No charges have been filed. No cause of death has been confirmed. What it tells you is that this story is not slowing down, and neither is the human cost of it. For the family still waiting on an answer, and for a widening circle of other people who are increasingly caught up in a national conversation about a death none of them may have had anything to do with. We'll be back the moment the grand jury timeline becomes clearer, or the moment anything from that lawsuit becomes public record. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and if you've got thoughts on any of what we covered today, the reward money, the FBI agents read, the cost of viral speculation, we want to hear it in the comments.